Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lunch Break Science. I'm Arielle Johnson from the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit that supports human evolution research and shares discoveries. Stay up to date with the latest discoveries by subscribing to our channel and smash that notification bell to hear direct from scientists. Also, be sure to share your location in the chat or comments. We're excited to know who's here, whether you're live or catching the replay. Today, we tackle one of our most popular topics, Neanderthals, by looking at some segments from Neanderthal experts Dr. Fernando Villanea and Dr. Bence Viola's past episodes in this Neanderthal mashup. The Lunch Break Science team and I are working on an upcoming Neanderthal episode too, and we want your input, so share your thoughts on what you want to know about Neanderthals in the chat. Now, let's take a look at the first segment and debunk some common Neanderthal myths.
I think, many people still think that Neanderthals are direct ancestors. This is a very old idea, just like many people think that chimpanzees are our ancestors. Of course, in reality, the story is much more complicated. Neanderthals are related to us, and they actually have contributed some genes to us. So, in a tiny, tiny way, they are a little bit our ancestors, or at least of present-day people who originate from outside of Africa. Denisovans, it's a bit more complicated there. So the Denisovans are this enigmatic population from mostly Central and now we also know from East Asia that are kind of the Asian cousins of Neanderthals. And we also found out, Svante Pääbo and his team found out that Denisovans also contributed genetically to some modern human populations. A very small amount, about 0.2%, to modern Asian populations, and a much larger amount, 3 to 6%, to modern Oceanian populations. So I think what really transformed our idea of our origin over the last 15 years is really this understanding from the ancient DNA research that instead of a linear evolution where one species or one group evolved into another, we actually have quite a mesh of human populations that whenever they met, they interacted and they tried to, or they interbred, likely in most cases successfully.
So we should start by talking about maybe the biggest surprise when it came to studying Neanderthal ancestry in people's genomes. So Neanderthals, we thought, were a mostly European species because most of the archaeology is centered there. That's where most of the fossils are coming from, in the tools, in the bones. And then we went out and then sequenced genomes for everyone around the world and looked for Neanderthal ancestry. And we found out that actually everyone has some Neanderthal ancestry. And in fact, Europeans probably have less Neanderthal ancestry than some other populations. So people in East Asia, in South Asia, and even in the Americas have a high component of Neanderthal ancestry. They also have Denisovan ancestry, which is actually a different species. So these are pieces coming from two different sources that may be doing things that are different than what like the modern human variant is doing. So I'm really interested in looking at these.
I want to give a special call out to our live viewers, Pete, Lou, Mary, Mike, and Rachel. Thank you for tuning in, and we're looking forward to hearing about your dream Neanderthal episode. So be sure to put your thoughts on what you want to see next on Lunch Break Science in the chat. We'd also like to thank the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, and viewers like you who made this episode of Lunch Break Science possible. Now, let's take a look at some interesting facts about Neanderthals.
So first, I started looking at the morphology, and I found that there's many, many traits in the teeth, for example, that are very typical for Neanderthals. If you look at the molars, these are the lower molars from a beautiful mandible. If you look at these molars, you see that they have something we call a mid-trigonid crest, which is a tiny little crest that connects the two cusps in the front. And this is something that, seems completely irrelevant, but it's something that is quite typical for Neanderthals. It's present in most Neanderthals, at least in the M1, in the first molar, and it's actually quite rare in modern humans. And the trigger scale teeth have this very typically, just like you'd expect in a Neanderthal. Similarly, the shape of the fourth premolars of one of the premolars is very asymmetrical, and that is a trait that Shar Bailey from NYU pointed out already 15 years ago or so, that it's very typical for Neanderthals. Similarly, you have shovel-shaped incisors, a trait that is very typical for Neanderthals. So, morphologically, it really looked like this material are quite typical Neanderthals, which is interesting because actually when I was studying the Okladnikov remains, one of the problems was that in most traits, actually, the Okladnikov remains did not show a typical Neanderthal morphology. And we don't really know why. One possibility that I thought about was that maybe they were just isolated for a long time, and due to genetic drift, some of the traits we see in Neanderthals disappeared. But we actually still don't know completely why.
So, as you say, this should not be a surprise to anyone that everyone who is around, who is alive today, has some amount of what is called archaic ancestry in their genomes. And so that is portions of their genomes that originate from either Neanderthals or Denisovans, or even some other hominids that we can identify, but we can't really link to any of the fossils. But we have those. And you would think that they are inert and they don't really do anything for your genome. But in reality, they actually really matter. So they impact the way we live our lives. They might impact our health. They impact what we call fitness, which is a biological quality. And so I'm really interested in studying exactly how these little genome fragments impact, everyone's quality of life.
Thank you, Mark and Matthew, for tuning in. It's been fun looking back at some of the amazing information shared by these two scientists. One of the most interesting facts that I learned from Fernando was the incredible amount of gigabytes the human genome takes up on a computer. And here is where you all come in. It's time for a quick quiz. You didn't think I was going to let you get away without testing your knowledge, did you? The way this will work is that I'll ask one question. 3 answer options will appear on the screen. Simply type the letter of the correct answer into the chat within the 30-second countdown period. So I'll say the question first, which is how many gigabytes does chromosome 1, that is only one chromosome of the human genome, take up on a computer? As a quick refresher, chromosome 1 has 249 million base pairs. Now we're going to look at our possible answers and start the countdown. The question again is, how many gigabytes does chromosome 1 take up on a computer? Now, let's start the countdown. Okay, I'm very curious to see what you've all answered, so let's take a look at some of the responses. Okay, we have C, which is 60, B, which is, I think, 35. Mike has said 120. So let's hear the correct answer from Fernando. How big are the data you work with, the sets? I mean, they've got to be pretty huge.
Oh yeah, no, they are really, really big. So, the human genome is 3 billion base pairs. And even though, like every person who's alive is 95% identical on their genomes, the 5% that is variable, that's still 150 million base pairs of differences. And so if you look at the 1,000 genomes data, which is what you're seeing on the screen right now, these are files from my computer. Chromosome 1, which is the largest chromosome in humans, compressed into a type of file called a VCF file, which is a file that just like minimizes the amount of space. It's still 1.2 gigabytes. Once you uncompress it, it's like 60 gigabytes, just to look for chromosome 1. Now you're seeing what happens when you look inside one of these VCF files, right? It's just lines of basic text, because that is the simplest, cheapest way you can do this, right? And so now you're scrolling down, looking at all different positions of the genome, starting in chromosome 1. And the human genome is so vast that you could scroll down for the rest of your life and you will never get to the end of this file, right? Like, I can't visualize this file all at once. If I had my computer to open a genome file like this and just like show it to me whole, my computer would probably burn down. So these are like enormous files.
Well, congratulations, Matthew, for being the first to answer correctly. It is chromosome takes up 60 gigabytes. We've already had some really amazing ideas come in from our viewers. Pete has suggested to have an interactive world map with the Neanderthal sites on our site, which would be really exciting, and I love that idea. And I also like the idea of a paper one too. That would be fun. And then we also had a comment from Mark about learning more about Neanderthal art, which is very, very interesting. There's some amazing work coming out. So we will definitely, the team is definitely taking down those ideas. So please, all of the viewers out there, please let us know what interests you and what you want to see next on lunch break. So Fernando works on his whiteboard reviewing theories. Bence works in the field searching for fossils. These are two very different experiences, but each is exciting in its own way. Let's hear what research is like for each of these scientists.
So I'm currently excavating at a Gravettian field site. It's an open-air site called Grub Kraneberg in the little village of Stilfried in Lower Austria. It's close to the border with Slovakia and the Czech Republic. I'm working at this site because it dates an interesting time period, the Gravettian, which is part of the Upper Paleolithic, dating to about between 30,000 and about 25,000 years ago. This site has been excavated already quite extensively in the 1990s to mid-2000s by Wolfgang Weiser. And as an undergrad, I worked at this site, which makes it kind of fun to return again and work here. At the moment, we're working in a somewhat different area than the previous excavations are, and we seem to have an occupational horizon that is somewhat younger because we only started here about 3 weeks ago, here with my co-PI, Philip Nixt, and I also saw Mayolan Bosch, his wife, and the third co-PI here on the left, working with us. We only started about 3 weeks ago, so we are not completely sure about the date yet, but we have the impression that this might be slightly younger than the previous occupations we know and might be going closer to the last glacial maximum. So to a time period when you have significant upheaval and changes in climate, and we want to know how the people adapted to these changes.
Oh, how cool. And what are we seeing here?
Yeah, so this is a time-lapse video we recorded at the excavation. We work in a checkerboard pattern. So we have every square meter, we have 4 sections. So we can have very detailed stratigraphic control over the very thin. I mean, these were very ephemeral occupations. We are not in the central part of a site here. We have only a few lithics and a few bones, but we think that we actually have at least 3 different, probably only very short occupations that might have, and we have no idea how much time passed between them. It could be just a couple of years. It could be dozens of years. It could also be hundreds of years. We might find out at some point with more detailed dating, but currently we don't know yet.
Oh, it's so neat to see that time-lapse video. I don't think we've ever had anything like that before on lunch break. What is it like working in the field there?
Well, it's a lot of fun. I think for me it's nice because it's going back to close to where I grew up, which of course is nice for a change. At the moment it's very hot. Climate change is a real problem. Also in Europe, you probably saw in the news that Europe is going through a historic drought and a heat wave, and we're struggling with that. Here you can see Feeding about 25 excavators is serious work. The amount of shopping, I've never shopped this much before. We routinely buy the whole stock of certain items in the supermarket, and they're not very happy with us. Once we even broke the conveyor belt because we put so much food on it at the checkout. It's work. Usually I actually work in Central Asia and in Russia, which of course, due to the current geopolitical situation, is a little bit more complicated. Life there is a little bit different. Here we are making shashlik at Obi Rahmat, but it's also very pleasant. In the end, as paleoanthropologists, we do have the privilege that our work in many ways is camping with our friends in the mountains. Like this is an Uzbek geologist, Sasha, who was a lot of fun. We also get to interact with the local people a lot. We got invited. This is actually the funeral of one of our colleagues' mothers. Again, with a large feast. In Kyrgyzstan, we eat in this communal setting. The food is very nice, lots of fruits, lots of meat. It's in general very enjoyable, except when it's too hot and when you have to line up for the shower for an hour.
Right. Okay. So, unlike all my other colleagues who either do field work, so they spend a lot of time in the field, or my colleagues who work in a lab and they do all these experiments, I think my day is probably very different from theirs. Like my day starts and ends on a whiteboard. So I will go to my whiteboard and I will say, okay, I have an interesting question, an interesting problem I want to solve. And I have access to all this data already exists on my computer. So how can I address this problem, right? And so the first thing I will do is I will draw on from theory. So population genetics is a field that is 200 years old. So we have 200 years of theory to draw from. And I will say, okay, so I think that this cool evolutionary process is happening, and this will result in very specific things on a genome. So what are my expectations? And expectations are everything in population genetics, right? So I will say, okay, if this really cool process is happening, what I expect to see is this. If this process is not happening, I expect to see something else. So that is the start of my day, right? I start by just writing down what are my expectations. Then I will have to think of how to actually go about doing these tests. So I will move to a second part of my whiteboard and I will say, okay, so I need to look at these very specific aspects of evolution. Who has worked on this before, right? Because there's people that have created tests for all these different things. And so I will say, okay, I'll do something called pseudocoding, which means that before I type code that goes in a computer, I will just write it down in words that everyone can understand, right? So like just simple logical steps. Like I'll say, okay, I need my computer to first access all the genomes and then just cut out the part that has MOC19, for example, specifically. Then once you have those that you can compare them, I want to look at heterozygosity. So then I will say, okay, so how do you look at heterozygosity? Okay, so you go position by position and you ask the computer, I want you to compare every two people and tell me if they're different at that position. If they are different, just count it and just give me a count of how many people were different at that position. And then just give me an aggregate count of these things. So I will say that in like human words. And then after that, I will go to my computer and I will code that in like, I'll script it. I'll have my computer do it. It will take a long time because genomes are huge and this is a lot of information. And I will get some kind of result, right? So that's going to be like some number. So heterozygosity, I'll get a number for that. Then I'll go back to my whiteboard. I have a big whiteboard. So there's like a third section of the whiteboard. And then I'll say, okay, so I see this number and this number falls into expectation A, which means, okay, this actually proves my theory. That's great. Now, how do I go about making that sound interesting to other people? And so I will then think about how to present this evolutionary problem in a way that is approachable for everyone, how to explain the test that I did in a way that is approachable, in a way that is replicable. So anyone can take my notes and just do the same thing that I did, and they can confirm my results. And then I'll think, okay, how do I make this approachable, not just to my colleagues who are going to peer review my papers, but also to the broader audience? Like, how do I make this interesting to people that care, right? Because ultimately that's what I want to do, right? I want to tell stories to everyone so people care about them. So that is more or less what my day looks like. I mean, really, like this process takes years from beginning to end, but
Thanks for joining us, Stilfried. Awesome to hear that Bence's site is so close to your hometown. Also, we have some great ideas from Mary about a future episode on Neanderthal genes and modern immunity, as well as traits that can be traced back to Neanderthal ancestry. We tackled a little bit of these immunity questions during our misconception episode, but delving deeper would be a really fascinating topic. So thank you for sharing the ideas. The study of ancient DNA has implications that reach far beyond simply understanding our past. Let's hear what Fernando and Bence have to say about how and why we study it.
Yes, so this is possible. I mean, this sounds like complete science fiction. When I first heard about this, I thought this must be a joke, but it actually works remarkably well. We still don't completely understand how it works, but it seems that DNA gets bound kind of in the pores of like clay nodules or so, and it remains quite well preserved. Of course, then the question is, how did this DNA get there? And our idea is likely in the back of the cave. Somebody just used it as a bathroom from time to time. Maybe in some cases it could also be something decomposing. The problem is, of course, that even normally when you work with ancient DNA, you have the problem that you have much less DNA in a bone than you had in the living individual. In the sediment, you have even less. And of course, you don't just have the DNA of a single human in there. You likely have the DNA of several different humans in there and various animals. And you have to pick that all apart. But Matthias Meyer is leading a team in Leipzig that's been working on this for at least 5 or 6 years now and has made amazing advances. And so I've been part of these papers too, but they've been able not only to extract mitochondrial DNA, but even nuclear DNA. So we actually have nuclear DNA from the sediments in Chigirska cave as well, which is pretty cool. What it also allows us, for example, I mean, the big hope for me is especially that in sites where we don't have any human bones preserved, we will be able of which human group occupied these sites. Sadly, there's some limitations to this. For example, in Selungur cave in Kyrgyzstan, we tried to get sediment DNA out, and just nothing was possible. Likely because the climate at Selungur is a bit more fluctuating, and so it's very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter, and that's probably not good for DNA preservation. So there are some limitations to it, but I think that in the grand scheme of things, the sediment DNA is really a revolutionary advance and will allow us to study sites where we don't have any human bones and still figure out who was there and what they were doing, kind of. And that's really cool.
It's just amazing.
yeah, this is one of those questions that are like, they're very like hypothetical, right? So in the future, what does that mean for humans? I don't know. I will tell you that we are definitely still evolving. None of our like modern comforts really have removed a lot of these pressures completely. We still suffer from pathogen infections all the time. Like our modern medicine is getting a lot better, but we still suffer from that. We still need to adapt to that. We, you know, the environment may be becoming more extreme now, and that means that we will have to adapt biologically as well as culturally at it. So I don't think that's going to remove genetic diversity and archaic diversity anytime soon. If anything, it might become more important. So I don't know, but that's very hypothetical. So, but thank you for the question. Right. So before I was mentioning that before genomes, we thought that Neanderthals were a mostly European species. And so we thought, okay, this is where we're going to find a lot of the archaic introgression is going to be in Europeans. That led to a lot of European genomes sequenced and a lot of effort going into looking at archaic introgression in Europeans. And we kind of sidelined all these other populations. But once we started to look at them, we realized that not only do they have more and more unique archaic ancestries, they're also probably solving some very different problems. And so that leads to some really, really interesting evolutionary stories. For me, I think the most interesting evolutionary story is thinking of indigenous Americans, right, as they populate the American continent. Because when you think about it, it's just an incredible journey and this incredible natural experiment, right? The ancestors live somewhere in near the Bering Strait, like the Bering Plateau. They are there for thousands of years. They are adapted to living in this kind of difficult environment. You can really farm, right? They probably have dogs, but they don't have any other domesticates because it's kind of difficult to keep them around. And then they make the crossing into the American continent. And all of a sudden, this opens all these possibilities, right? Because now they're running into all the different environments. They're running into the grasslands. They're running into deserts. They're going to the rainforest. They're going into the Caribbean islands. They're even going into high altitude deserts in Patagonia, for example, right? And so all of these involve new challenges. And so their biology has to adapt to these new challenges. And culturally, they also have to adapt to these new challenges. And not only did they survive, they thrive, right? They were like an incredible success story. Like these peoples and civilizations are extremely well adapted to living in all these different environments, to the point where they invented basically agriculture again. They domesticated hundreds of species. These complex civilizations, they invent mathematics, they invent astronomy, they build pyramids, right? So it's an incredible story of success, but it's coming from a very unique sort of bottleneck in the past, right? They're all coming from this one population that is definitely not adapted to all these environments. And so I think that's fascinating. That is just my favorite, I guess, aspect of human evolution to look at.
We hope you enjoyed today's Neanderthal mashup, which is a bit of a teaser for the episodes of these two amazing scientists. We shared the links to Fernando and Bence's full episodes in the chat and video description to dig deeper into the fascinating world of Neanderthals. We hope you'll check them out. We've enjoyed hearing your thoughts about Neanderthals and look forward to incorporating them into new episodes. So, for now, thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leaky Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge. Lunch Break Science is brought to you by the Leaky Foundation and made possible by the generous support of the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, as well as viewers like you. Show your support of Lunch Break Science by subscribing to our channel, clicking on notifications, and giving us a thumbs up, or making a donation to help us create new content. Still craving science and can't wait for the next episode? You can feast on the Leaky Foundation's content library with past episodes, lectures, our podcast origin stories, and more. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next time.